Millions of people around the world have quietly crossed Florida off their list of the most worthwhile places to visit. What happened to retirement paradise? Once the dream destination of millions, a place where the sun never sets, where the American dream is woven with sunshine and tranquility. However, that dream now seems to be slowly transforming into a nightmare. Once bustling shopping centres are now left with empty storefronts and dust-covered walkways. Streets that used to be packed with tourists now stand desolate, lined with tents, trash, and homeless individuals with nowhere else to go. And worst of all, it seems even the police are hesitant to enter certain areas where the law is no longer a barrier but merely words that exist on paper. Is this just a temporary setback? Or is it a sign of a deeper collapse as faith in the promised land is gradually eroding? In today's video, we'll trace the cracks that have silently spread across the map of Florida, from the economy and society to security, to understand why one of America's most prosperous states is on the brink of collapse. When was the last time you stepped into a crowded, lively shopping mall? That's one of the questions that makes most of us hesitate when answering. And for residents living in Florida, that question is even harder to answer. Just a few minutes' drive from Disney World, Seminole Town Center was once the epitome of the American dream in its most glamorous form. Opened in 1995, this shopping center once welcomed thousands of visitors each week, from local families in Sanford to international tourists who came to Florida seeking a bit of magic. Here, you can shop at Macy's, choose gifts at Sears, have dinner at the food court, and then end with a movie at Regal Cinema. It's not just a shopping center, it's a living ritual, where every Christmas begins with Santa Claus taking pictures with children against the backdrop of Bing Crosby's music. But if you came back here today, perhaps all you would find is empty space, covered in a hazy layer of dust. Since Sears and Macy's, two pillars that once supported the mall's soul, have successively withdrawn, the entire shopping ecosystem here has collapsed in a domino effect. Small shops are gradually closing. The pastry counter that used to be there is now just a glass surface smudged with fingerprints. And by January 2025, most of the interior space at Seminole Town Center will be locked, like a room once filled with joy and memories, now permanently sealed by the very oblivion of time. Nationwide, experts warn that by the end of this decade, up to 87% of major shopping centers could be forced to close completely. E-commerce is accelerating, consumer habits are changing, and the model that was once a symbol of a prosperous America is now gradually becoming a ruin. For Seminole Town Center, the COVID-19 pandemic wasn't just the final blow. It was a wake-up call for a model that had been decaying from within. Once a repository of American memories, it is now just an empty concrete block, devoid of life, devoid of soul. Behind the Publix area, winding through a row of trees, is the Regal Cinema, a movie theater that was once an icon of popular culture. Now, it's just a remnant of a once glorious past. Inside, everything seems untouched. The projector, the ticket price board, the soda machine. Everything stands still, covered in dust, as if forgotten in the flow of time. A few lights are still on. The fire alarm system is still working, as if it's currently trying to cling to the last breath of a bygone era. For a generation that lived in a time when shopping malls were miniature versions of the world, where every corner of a store held a piece of memory, returning to Seminole Town Center or Regal Cinema today is no different from standing before their own life's relics. No more crowded parking lots, no more children's laughter echoing through the game arcade, and no more sweet pastry smells from Auntie Anne's. Instead, there are only solitary footsteps left, mostly those of people who have nowhere else to go. They didn't come to shop, but to find a safe place to sleep tonight. If a shopping mall can go from its peak to obscurity in just 2 decades, what will happen next to the places we are putting our trust in? Is what's decaying. Not just the walls, but the belief that everything will always be stable just because it was stable in the past. Don't take your eyes off the video, because there are more twists behind that you won't believe your eyes. Amidst empty shopping malls, within decaying street corners, is a forgotten class of people, quietly reclaiming the places that once belonged to them. If Walt Disney World is paradise for children, then Florida was once likened to Disneyland for the elderly, a place they came not to begin a dream, but to peacefully end a lifetime. Since the 1980s, millions of seniors from New York, Chicago, or Detroit have left the cold industrial cities to come here, not to find work, but to rediscover themselves. They sold the house they'd lived in their whole lives, packed their memories into an old truck, and headed for Sarasota, Fort Myers, or the Villages, where the sound of the waves mingles with the laughter of a warm and open community. Florida used to be more than just a retirement destination. It's a promise that if you've lived a kind life, you deserve a gentle ending. But what happens when that promise is no longer kept? Florida today has no room for ordinary retirees. The single-story houses nestled under coconut trees have been replaced by resort high-rises, golf courses, and million-dollar apartment complexes overlooking the sea. A generation that dedicated their lives to honest labor, workers, veterans, postal employees, is being sidelined simply because they can't keep up with rising prices. When rent exceeds pension income, when home insurance doubles in just 1 year, and when the subsidy system becomes tangled, even the most frugal people can fall to the bottom. According to a 2025 report by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Florida currently has over 31,000 people experiencing homelessness, and nearly a quarter of them are over 55 years old. The data isn't just about numbers. It's a deep cut into the heart of American society. Those who were once the backbone of the state now don't even have a roof over their heads to return to. When there was no more space in low-income housing and public land was fenced off or filled in, a strange and heartbreaking phenomenon began to spread. Abandoned shopping malls became makeshift shelters for people with nowhere else to go. The once grand main halls have become temporary bedrooms, where the homeless try to find a hidden corner to escape the harshness of the streets, the danger of refugee camps, and the shame of facing society's gaze. From the heart of the consumer dream, shopping malls have now become ghost towns due to emptiness and neglect. But it doesn't stop on the inside. That forgotten group of people is now present every place, as if reclaiming every street corner, every sidewalk, where they once existed as a normal part of society. The sight of tent cities springing up between gas stations in Orlando, under bridges in Jacksonville, or behind docks in Tampa is no longer unfamiliar. And most heartbreakingly, in Miami, one of the richest cities in the United States, where 2 out of every 5 homeless people are over 60 years old. They once came here hoping to live out their final days in peace, but their dreams were shattered under a plastic tarp in the scorching summer heat, or on the freezing concrete of winter. What was once called a retirement paradise has now become a hell of survival, where every street once shimmering with light now has an elderly figure huddled by a trash can, trying to retain a shred of dignity amidst the city's neglect and the indifference of the entire community. Perhaps what haunts people the most isn't the lost houses, but a dream that silently dissolved while we still thought it would always be there. If even Florida, a symbol of peaceful endings, is turning its back on the very people who once believed in it, what else can the people living in Florida dream of? In Florida, a state once considered a retirement paradise, where you could find temporary work to get through the winter or supplement low retirement income, job stability is now becoming a rare privilege. Those who once believed that working hard would be enough to pay rent and live a minimalist but safe life are now facing a harsh reality. Jobs are scarce, while rental prices are soaring like arrows. As of June 2025, the unemployment rate in Florida is approximately 3.7%. It sounds low, but let's not be too optimistic just yet. This number does not reflect those who have stopped looking for work, those forced into part-time work despite wanting full-time, or those who have to live on temporary, non-beneficial jobs. In Taylor County, the highest unemployment rate in the state reached 6.2%. Meanwhile, places like Monroe County, famous for tourism, have the lowest rate at 2.4%. But ask yourself, who can live in Monroe on a waiter's or housekeeper's salary? And are there any people over 55 willing to work 2 to 3 jobs simultaneously to have a place to stay? Even in densely populated counties like Miami-Dade, which has the state's largest workforce, the unemployment rate is at 2.7%. But the downside of this figure is the fierce competition and the ever-increasing cost of living. Thousands of people, especially the elderly or those who used to be self-employed, are now adrift in a system that doesn't protect them. They are unemployed and ineligible for benefits. Healthcare is being cut, and the skills they have are no longer relevant to the market. Florida added 142,300 new jobs in the first half of 2025. An impressive number, but mostly in low-wage service industries like serving, logistics, delivery, and short-term jobs in tourism. These jobs don't come with stability or health insurance, and certainly not enough to afford a small apartment at $800 a month in major cities. People work all month, but still sleep in their cars or under the shelter of an abandoned warehouse. More worryingly, the wave of automation and AI is quietly replacing thousands of low-skilled jobs. In areas that once relied on retail or call center jobs, many shopping malls have been abandoned and then become temporary shelters for the homeless. Buildings that were once symbols of American consumerism are now giant sleeping rooms with no air conditioning, no security, and no hope. This situation raises a serious question. If a hard-working American who is not a criminal and does not have any addictions can still become homeless due to job loss, is the system working correctly? We are living in a society where working hard no longer guarantees a decent life. When effort cannot bring about stability, people begin to lose their way. Will the future be brighter for the younger generation? Or will they be the next victims in the cycle of unstable work, rising cost of living, and the fading American dream? There was a class that was once considered the backbone of America, not rich, not poor, but comfortable enough to feel stable. That's the middle class. But in Florida in 2025, that class is caught between two worlds. Not poor enough to receive subsidies, but also not rich enough to feel secure. The average income for a middle-class household in Florida currently ranges from $46,900 to $40,700 per year, depending on the region. It sounds like a lot. But when the cost of living, home insurance, medication, and especially housing prices are all rising uncontrollably, that number becomes increasingly meaningless. In Tampa, to buy an average home, one needs to earn over $100,000 per year, not including taxes, maintenance, and mortgage interest. Meanwhile, the state's minimum wage, even though it will increase to $14 per hour from September 2025, is still only enough to survive, not to live. Members of the middle class are now struggling to maintain a stable appearance, even though there's a storm of expenses brewing inside. They still drive to the office, still buy groceries, still pay their children's tuition, but at the same time, they're cutting back on medical expenses, postponing home repairs, and anxiously checking their mailboxes each time, fearing an unexpected bill that could upend everything. The irony is that the middle class, once considered the engine of the economy, is now being overlooked in support policies. They earn more than the threshold to apply for medical assistance, but not enough to afford an individual insurance plan. They are not prioritized for social housing, but they also cannot compete with investors or wealthier residents in the same neighborhood. They are not unemployed, but they are gradually losing the right to dream. Middle class was once synonymous with a certain lifestyle: owning a home, having a car, taking summer vacations, and having faith in the future. But now, many people have to redefine. Middle class means having 2 jobs, no medical debt, and still being able to pay the rent each month. A 59-year-old woman from Fort Myers, who used to work as an administrative employee at a public school, shared, "I used to think I had calculated things well. I have a pension and a small savings. But then the home insurance doubled. The cost of medication is increasing at a dizzying rate. Now, I have to share a room with my divorced daughter. We're both middle class, but neither of us has enough money to buy stability and security." The middle class, which was supposed to be the buffer between the rich and the poor, is now thinning and cracking. On one side are gated villa communities with swimming pools and golf courses. On the other side are temporary tent camps, overcrowded shelters, and lines of people waiting for food distribution. And in the middle, there's a class that still wears shirts to work every morning, but isn't sure where they'll go if their salary is cut or their child gets sick. Florida, and the United States in general, has never lacked effort. But when effort is no longer rewarded with stability, can the American dream still be for the majority? It's not just the story of those worried about next month's bills. It's a question for an entire generation that once believed that if they tried hard enough, everything would be okay. In a country that once prided itself on a strong social safety net, perhaps no one would have imagined that one day an elderly person would have to queue for 4 hours to get a food voucher or sleep overnight in a truck because the shelter was overcrowded. But in Florida, in 2025, such stories are no longer exceptions. They are becoming part of everyday reality. The problem isn't just about soaring costs or uncontrolled rent. It's deeper than that, stemming from shortages and cracks in the very policy safety nets designed to protect people when they face hardship. Those safety nets, created after World War II, expanded during the New Deal, and strengthened over decades, are now gradually fraying. And the first to fall were the old, the weak, those who no longer had the strength to climb back up. Florida once had hundreds of local assistance programs, from rental assistance and in-home healthcare to free meals for seniors. But currently, most of them are overloaded, underfunded, or have been cut. Many counties no longer have enough staff to process housing assistance applications within 6 months. Some places even require online applications, something that seems small, but is a significant barrier for seniors who are not used to using computers. Meanwhile, shelters, which are the last line of defense before someone is pushed onto the streets, are also breaking down. According to statistics from the Florida Housing Coalition, over 50% of homeless shelters in major counties like Miami-Dade and Orange County have been operating over capacity since the beginning of 2024, with no signs of improvement in 2025. Places that were once temporary have now become unwilling, permanent addresses for the elderly, single women, and even families who once had stable jobs. Part of the reason is that policy is still lagging behind reality. When rent increased by 30% in just 2 years, housing assistance remained the same as in 2018. When insurance costs double after each storm, damage claims require a complex process that takes months. Every effort lagged behind the pace of the crisis, and by the time policies were adjusted, thousands had already fallen into homelessness. Florida doesn't lack laws, but it does lack mechanisms to protect the most vulnerable. A prime example is the lack of mandatory regulations requiring landlords to keep rent stable for seniors or those with fixed incomes. In an open market, Retirees must compete with investors, Airbnb tourists, and demographic groups who can afford to pay more. What's the result? As people who have paid taxes, served in the military, and taught our children and grandchildren, they are being forced to leave the place they have lived for decades, simply because it is no longer suitable for profit potential. The most heartbreaking thing is that many elderly people don't want to apply for assistance because they feel ashamed or unworthy. There used to be people who believed in individual effort, who believed in just rewards. But that belief is wearing thin. With each rejection, each unanswered email, each night spent sleeping in the car by the side of the road. If the very people who once kept America standing through so many crises are no longer supported by America itself, what will today's youth learn about the value of effort? Perhaps the most heartbreaking thing isn't the numbers, but the feeling of helplessness when you see a place once considered the reward of a lifetime slowly falling into a spiral of instability. Florida, the promised land of sunshine, retirement, and relaxation, is now facing a simple question that no one dares to answer. Is this still the ideal destination to begin, the final chapter of life? Once a symbol of the peaceful American dream, Florida today is fraught with contradictions that are not easily resolved. On the same street, you might find a newly opened resort with room rates of $600 per night, and just a few hundred meters away, a tent city where elderly people huddle in the scorching summer heat, not knowing what they'll eat tomorrow or where they'll sleep. An uncertain future is no longer just a story for the homeless or young people who have lost their jobs. It has begun to infiltrate every middle-class family. Those who once thought they were adequately prepared for old age. People who have jobs, homes, and insurance, but still feel like everything is slipping out of their grasp. A 2-week storm could double home insurance premiums. One uninsured illness can wipe out a lifetime of savings. An unexpected rent hike could turn long-term renters into visitors in their own state. And as the social support system slows down and procedures become more complicated, even the most resilient people begin to ask, is this still a place I can call home? Florida is not only facing a homelessness crisis or income inequality. This state is also facing a climate crisis, with rising sea levels, threatening coastal areas, and increasingly powerful tropical storms eroding both infrastructure and residents' morale. Cities like Miami, Tampa, and Jacksonville are all on the high-risk list if sea levels continue to rise by 1 meter in the coming decades. And if older people who once chose Florida for retirement begin to leave, what will preserve the soul of this state? Who will replace the communities that once created a friendly and orderly atmosphere? Can the new urban developments that are springing up fill the void of belonging? Or are they just cold modern boxes for the few who can afford to live inside? Florida was once a symbol of new beginnings, not for young people seeking fame, but for those who had worked and sacrificed their whole lives, just hoping for a place to rest, to slow down, to reconnect with themselves. But today, the place once synonymous with the sound of waves and laughter echoes with the wail of ambulance sirens, the murmur of the homeless, and even the chilling silence of street corners that were once bathed in sunshine. Something is breaking down, not just in infrastructure or policy, but deeper, in the belief that everything will be all right. Because when even those who once believed in the American dream begin to doubt, perhaps what we lose is not just a roof over our heads, but the feeling of belonging to a country that once put its people first. If even Florida, once considered the ultimate peaceful destination, can no longer keep its promise to the elderly, then where will America take them? And us? Next. Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue to tell stories that not everyone is willing to listen to, but everyone needs to know. Each share is an opportunity to add one more person who understands, one more person who cares, and one more ray of hope for those whose lives are lived in silence. This video is not intended to condemn any organisation, individual, or political group. All information presented is based on publicly available data, official reports, and field observations from multiple perspectives. The stories, images, and perspectives presented are educational in nature, reflecting social realities to stimulate constructive discussion without creating incitement, panic, or stereotyping. We do not condone any illegal behaviour whatsoever. We do not normalise suffering, and we do not turn human misery into entertainment. This is not a conclusion, but an invitation to reflect together, to dialogue together, and to hold on to the remaining humanity within each of us.